Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. I can see there's a few people on the call. All right. Have a look. Yeah, I've got quite a few people logging in. So look, I think what I'll do is I'll get started just because it is 2 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time on the dot. Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today for this webinar. My name is Kate. I'm from the University of Western Australia. I co-lead the Plastics and Packaging Research Stream for CERN APAC with Olamide from Swinburne University of Technology. And today we'll be talking about circular transformations, partnership-driven solutions to plastics and packaging in Asia Pacific. Now, this event is part of the CERN APAC Continual Conference for 2025. So you might have already been to one of the events. Previously, we had an opening event, and we've also had a couple of events from the Textiles Research Stream. But today we'll be hosting the Plastics and Packaging Research Stream. We'll be hosting this event. And in terms of what we'll be discussing, I'll dive into that shortly, but I wanted to just speak more generally about the network, as you might be attending, you might not have attended a CERN APAC event before. So the Circular Economy Research Network is a collective of researchers, policymakers, industry professionals, and community stakeholders as well. So there's a lot of different groups that get involved in our network. It was established in 2022. It was a collaboration between Monash, RMIT, Swinburne, and CSIRO. We currently have over 250 members across 10 research streams. So there's a plastics and packaging research stream. There's also the textile stream, as I mentioned. We've got food and organics, construction and the built environment, and a lot of other streams as well. So if you are interested in joining, we will post a link to register in the comments section. In terms of the plastics and packaging research stream, we've got over 50 members currently, primarily researchers, but also we have industry practitioners as well. So we've really enjoyed having a lot of collaboration between academia, but also industry and those implementing solutions on the ground. A key output that we had was in 2024. We published an article in the Australasian Journal of Environmental Management, and that was on the Red Cycle recycling program as a case study, looking into soft governance solutions for soft plastics. So we looked into the factors that impacted that particular recycling scheme, and then we made a number of recommendations and key insights for governance solutions for soft plastics in Australia moving forward. So if you are interested in that, we've posted that down in the chat. But in terms of today's session, we're going to be welcoming 3 wonderful panelists today, and we are launching a report, and this has arisen out of the Plastics and Packaging Research Stream. It's focusing on collaborative solutions to circularity, examining plastics and packaging in Asia Pacific. So it is really looking at that multi-stakeholder partnership-driven piece of the puzzle when it comes to circularity. And we'll be welcoming 3 of our co-authors from that publication. So we've got Melissa from CSIRO, we've got Mayuri from Anvarta, and we've got Edward from Nextek joining us. So I'm very excited to get into the conversation with them. So they'll be looking at case studies from Australia, Sri Lanka, and further abroad in Europe. So I'd like to hand over now to my colleague Olamide, who will talk generally about the report. So over to you, Olamide.
Thank you, Kate. Hello, everyone. We are happy that you're joining us for this webinar. So the plastics and packaging stream, since we started, I've been looking at how we can develop, outputs that help in advancing circularity in plastics and packaging in Asia Pacific. And our theme for this year was looking at case studies and different research findings that talk about how collaboration is taking place across Asia Pacific, not just about the theory part of it, but also how stakeholders are actually implementing collaborative approaches in advancing circularity for plastics and packaging. Aside from the fact that we are an Asia Pacific network, but we also recognize the fact that plastics is a huge challenge in Asia Pacific. There's a lot of plastic that end up in water in water bodies, and also affects the natural life and also humans systems as well. And circular economy globally has been mentioned as a very good approach to reduce the amount of materials that are leaked into the environment, but also ensure that we make use of the value, we maximize the value in resources within our economic systems. So we are trying to see how circular economy can serve as a paradigm shift for businesses, for policymakers and other stakeholders in implementing a new way of doing and living. So the report that we developed, that we just published today, is looking at how not just policy, but how people have developed policy and strategy around plastics and packaging, especially how people have been able to achieve cross-border and multi-sectoral collaborations in Asia Pacific. We also have case studies in Europe that we're also going to hear from Edward today, and lessons that apply to Asia Pacific as well. The report kind of brought together different perspectives from research, from also case studies that talked about advanced recycling, that talked about policy systems, that talked about also like waste management systems, for example, in India. But the aim was to apply a kind of systemic perspective to collaboration and understand what are the things that make collaboration work, especially with regards to plastics and packaging. So we are able to develop this framework based on the different insights from the chapters of the report that highlighted the forms of collaboration that were mentioned by our authors, the mechanisms of collaboration and the enablers of effective collaboration. So for example, some of the chapters spoke to the need for a transition broker. So it's not just about waiting for governments to implement policies. Of course, that is important in terms of, for example, imposed governance, but there's also a need for having a caretaker that is able to bring everybody on board and able to make everybody stick to goals. But there are also chapters that also mention the need for engaging community and residents. For example, when you talk about recycling, improving recycling behavior, and also making sure that people have a say in the type of policy that are implemented around plastics and packaging. But so some of the chapters also highlight the importance of having data sharing, for example, having a digital product passport to make sure that there's tracking and traceability for plastics and packaging materials, especially because, plastics and packaging deal with a lot of, for example, food industry, in the health industry as well, and even in the beauty sector as well. There's a need there to be able to track the materials as they leave the consumers, and even throughout this supply chain. The chapters also mention extended producer responsibility as a vehicle for collaboration. And how there are also highlights of how that actually been implemented in Asia Pacific. So, but going to the enablers, there's a need for clear goals and objectives, and that could come from the governments or other transition brokers that help the stakeholders to set clear objectives for them to achieve in terms of the collaboration that has been shown to work through the case studies that we have in the reports. They also mentioned that trust and transparency is important in some of the case studies as well. And there's also a need for continuous improvement and learning. So it's not just getting to a project and starting a project, but also improving and learning from maybe some of the mistakes or some of the lessons that have been garnered through the project. So we have projects from India, from Australia, from Sri Lanka. So we have different case studies that cover Asia Pacific or true. At the end of this webinar, we're going to show you a link to directly access the reports. And like Kate mentioned, we have three authors today with us that are going to be speaking directly to their specific chapters and the lessons and case studies that they talked about in the chapters. So Melissa is going to be speaking about how advanced recycling was delivered in Australia. Mayuri is going to talk about Sri Lanka's circular economy journey, and Edward is also going to share lessons from Europe around NEXTLOOPP's projects. So yeah, thank you very much, and we look forward to a very engaging discussion.
Thanks, Olamide. I also just note that we will have time for Q&A at the end. So as the presenters are speaking, feel free to drop questions into the Q&A and we will address them at the end. So I'd like to welcome first up Dr. Melissa Skidmore. So Melissa is a senior research scientist with a track record of more than 2 decades at the forefront of polymer, synthetic and computational chemistry and polymer analysis and characterization. Melissa leads the Waste Innovation Work Package for the CSIRO Ending Plastic Waste Initiative and is a key figure in the CSIRO Circular Economy Research. So thank you so much, Melissa, for joining us, and I'll hand over to you.
Thanks very much, Kate. So I'm hoping I'm showing my slide. I'm the first up, so I'm a bit of a guinea pig here. So I'm just going to start with a brief background just to set the scene on why, as part of this report, I was discussing advanced recycling and specifically what it is in context to the circular economy and with a focus on plastic packaging. And I'm also going to touch on why collaboration and partnerships are really crucial to shaping the future of advanced recycling in Australia. So advanced recycling is a complementary process to mechanical recycling. Now, there are a number of forms of advanced recycling. It can be gasification or depolymerization. In the context of the report, there was 2 that were presented, and those were hydrothermal liquefaction, and that's done by Licella. And we also have enzymatic or biological advanced recycling and pyrolysis, which is probably one of the most advanced forms of advanced recycling. Now, hydrothermal liquefaction uses supercritical water to break down plastics into oil, char, and gas, whilst pyrolysis is a process of heating plastic in the absence of oxygen, and that produces an oil, a gas, or a char. Ideally, what it's doing, and in terms of the circular economy, is we're able to break that plastic down back into its chemical building blocks, so we can then go and create new plastics from that. Now, in terms of the products that we're getting from advanced recycling, there is a plastic to fuel pathway, which is a recovery. There is a plastic to chemicals pathway, and that's also a recovery. So we're thinking about this in terms of the waste hierarchy. But when we have that plastic to plastic, we're actually recycling and we're generating that plastic back from the used form that we've consumed and has been generated, and we're taking it back down to those monomers, as they're called, and that from them we can make the plastic. Now, if we think about this in terms of the waste hierarchy, once we either are unable to, or we haven't avoided, substituted, or reused the plastic, and we're actually at a point of recycling, advanced recycling is one of the best methods that we're going to have to divert mixed, flexible, and particularly contaminated plastics, which a lot of that is packaging, from landfill, and really create that certified circular loop. But why we presented this in the report is because advanced recycling is not yet at scale in Australia. On to the next page. Now, the reason why advanced recycling isn't yet at scale in Australia, although that obviously presents a huge opportunity for Australia, it presents a number of challenges. The main challenge, and one of the biggest ones, is that it really involves a high amount of capital and operating costs. And so what we need are clear market signals, we need legislation, we need offtake agreements, as well as we need those investors to be really confident, or they will remain hesitant. And for this, we need coalitions and partnerships that are going to demonstrate end user commitment, the emerging markets, as well as a government's commitment. Another big factor that is a challenge for the advanced recycling establishing itself as a method in Australia is around concerns that there aren't consistent and clean feedstocks. and a viable collection mechanism to do that. And so this is where partnerships have come in to demonstrate that we do have reliable collection and we can generate high quality input streams that will operate efficiently. There's also the question of technology readiness and scalability. So although pyrolysis in particular has been around since the 1970s, it's really been only in the last 10 years that we've really seen it as a viable method for us to deal with the plastic crisis that we've created. And so we need to demonstrate that there really is that ecosystem to support advanced recycling. And for this, we need demonstration plants and we need those collaborations and partnerships that show that we have the vital chain needed for that confidence to have this enter our market. And of course, there's regulatory uncertainty as well as classification issues. And so we need to demonstrate the environmental compliance. And through that, we need partnerships and the development of pilots. And this also leads to public education because a lot of people see advanced recycling as just burning of plastics. And we have to show that it is a method that doesn't do that and that it does meet all the environmental and regulatory standards. So what's the outlook and where are partnerships playing a role in this? Well, there are numerous initiatives through coalitions and partnerships that are demonstrating the potential of AR. We've seen a really strong set up by the Australian Food and Grocery Council around collection and feedstock recycling, which was presented in the report, where they worked with councils as well as the community and collectors to show that we can collect those feedstocks. There's also a number of pilot studies that are looking at the process and the technology. And then we're seeing partnerships for end markets. So these partnerships have been multi-stakeholder collaborations and there've been a really coordinated effort across industry and stakeholders right across the value chain. So we're talking at all levels of government as well as communities. And this really does suggest a positive trajectory to really realising circularity in packaging. And I'm hoping as part of our discussion today, we can expand on more of those examples. So the examples from the Food and Grocery Council, we can talk about the KitKat example, as well as some of the initiatives that were led by the advanced recyclers themselves.
Thank you so much, Melissa. It's such an interesting and evolving space with advanced recycling. I know like a lot of people that I've spoken to have talked about that, you know, getting it at scale, how that's a real challenge, but it's certainly a challenge I'm sure that will be overcome. And yeah, the role of partnership-driven solutions is really huge in this area. So thank you. Okay, next up we have Dr. Mayuri Wijayasundara. So Mayuri is a circular economy expert with over 20 years experience as a senior industry practitioner, academic and advisor working internationally. She's led major industry transformation programs in the Asia Pacific, was recently engaged as a circular economy expert at UN Habitat and is a practicing advisor through the company she founded, Anvarta. Mayuri sits on ministerial and industry boards, including Recycling Victoria, and holds a PhD from the University of Melbourne. So welcome, Mayuri. Over to you.
Thank you, Kate. Such a privilege to be presenting in this forum. Let me share my screen. I hope you can see my screen. Excellent. All righty. So what we're going to talk about is the journey of Sri Lanka when looking at sort of the last 2 or 3 decades and reflecting on the journey that Sri Lanka as a country has undertaken, especially in transforming the way the industrial waste is sort of dealt with. So I'll probably sort of walk through it in breaking it down to a couple of eras. And to produce this study, we interviewed quite a few people in Sri Lanka. And then my experience in Sri Lanka at the time I was an industry practitioner was also immensely helpful. So I'm representing Anvarta today. To give a very quick introduction about Anvarta, we are based in Australia and we have a company established in Asia Pacific, based in Sri Lanka. We are into research, education, innovation, advisory, and transformation support. And we are specialized in making alternatives towards a circular economy to be competitive in markets. That's our main theme and specialization. So on this publication, coming back to it, we thought it's nice to sort of look back and reflect on the journey of how Sri Lanka basically, based on the availability of recycling and waste management facilities, and at the same time, the evolution of the regulatory and policy framework, how these played sort of side by side in making Sri Lanka move to different eras into circular economy. So what I have is the pre-solution era, where every country has a sort of a chicken and egg type of situation. We want to enact policy and we want to have an enforcement framework, but at the same time, if we do we have enough solutions? So there was this era where there was no sort of permitted hazardous waste destruction facility. There's no permitted industrial waste management facility. And then even if you have policy, enforcement was not a sort of a possibility because of that. And at the same time, there were a lot of export processing zones are present in Sri Lanka. So Sri Lanka has an export orientation when it comes to manufacturing, especially textile waste. And there are a couple of export processing zones established as clustered industrial setups in different parts of the country. So what we analyzed was when one solution emerged, how it helped the rest of the regulatory system to be set up and running. And then that again led to market participation of having more solutions available to accelerate the journey. So that's the kind of the synopsis of our discussion. Moving to the next one. So it's a timeline and a map. I think I briefly mentioned unregulated waste disposal happening in export processing zones because there was hardly any facility available. And in this era where between 2000 to 2010, there was a permitted hazardous waste co-processing facility established by Holcim Lanka. And that helped probably acceleration and inducing some of the other solutions by other market participants. So we use the word cement kiln co-processing here. I think Melissa showed the waste management hierarchy. And if you kind of take the bottom sort of solutions of the hierarchy, you have incineration, landfilling. And then probably the mid end of the hierarchy, you have recycling, and on top you have things like reuse. So cement kiln co-processing is somewhere between, is above incineration landfilling, but below recycling, because there's energy and raw material recovery happening in cement kilns. When you process industrial waste with cement kilns, sometimes the raw materials are sort of used for their raw material value and embedded in cement as a material. And sometimes the things like tank bottoms, sludge waste, paint waste, and things sort of more hazardous waste, it kind of forms into a blend of fuel and used to replace coal, which is used as replacing coal, which is typically used in cement kilns. So that's why the word co-processing is used. The term is coming from the fact that there's a blend of materials being processed together with the cement raw materials and fuel, and then some are being recognized for material value, some are being recognized for fuel value. So this solution was sort of the only permitted solution this decade, and I'll probably share with you the other solutions that emerged as a part of the solution. So in countries like Sri Lanka, for example, a lot of the Southeast Asian countries. So right now, Sri Lanka, I think, is in a very advanced stage compared to a lot of the Southeast Asian countries in their journey towards a circular economy. But one of the key challenges any such country has is basically there's a lot of informal practices and how to formalize them. So with the emergence of the cement kiln co-processing solution, several other solutions towards a circular economy emerged by having small scale players sort of coming and playing a role there, because now the regulatory system is enforced. So things like resource brokering and reselling, upcycling of recyclable waste, packaging, waste recycling, decontamination of containers and diverting some of the other waste to upcycling, and then producing resource blends for other users. So these type of solutions basically sort of started emerging very rapidly, helping the waste management industry and the resource recovery industry to formalize with the emergence of the other solution in the background. A few drivers we identified. So this is a map of Sri Lanka. I should have actually shown this before. This is a map of Sri Lanka. And the cement kiln co-processing solution was based in Puttalam. Colombo is the main capital. And in the places where there are dots, there are export processing zones, which are organized as clustered industrial setups. So three factors which drove this transition. One is co-location of industries helped aggregation of waste and helped sort of economical processing because it's happening at one place. Then secondly, this company who established this co-processing solution in CSIRO, at that time it was called GeoCycle, was backed by the cement business. So they had the financial strength to sort of take the financial shock of establishing the whole business and wait till the market reacts as a startup, which is not a privilege a small and medium-sized enterprise would have. So being backed by sort of a player which had financial strength was one major factor. Then on the other hand, as I mentioned, countries like Sri Lanka has a very high export orientation, even though the country's regulation are not up to the level of international best practices. Because you're selling to international markets, you are operating and producing big brands. And there are large conglomerates who want to keep up with the international best practices and global standards. So there's market is basically a few steps ahead compared to the actual regulatory requirement that needs to be enforced at country level. So it is another driver for this type of transition. Last slide. I hope I have a minute, Kate, to finish up. Yeah, cool. A quick snapshot of where it is and where it's heading. So Sri Lanka now, as I mentioned, is in a quite an advanced stage in their journey towards circular economy, starting with industrial ecology. There are waste stream specific solutions and there's a market and a sort of an industry set up for resource recovery. There are upcycling markets supported by large firms, enabling SME participation and formalizing those setups. And there's a voluntary EPR scheme currently enacted, but at the same time, because it's voluntary, the Ministry of Environment is currently doing sort of amendments to ensure that the operational mechanism is set up. And then there are pilot projects undertaken by corporates to sort of try it out. And product stewardship schemes are being explored, and some of the organizations are being established or under consultation. There are quite a few sort of happening in this area. And when it comes to upcycling, there are some grant and aid funded initiatives being explored. Now, for example, if you think of plastic recycling to produce food grade packaging, unless the upcycling stream is not very regulated and administered, you have a sort of a fear and a scare to use it for food grade packaging. So with grant and aid funding, initiatives like that is being explored, whether you can actually administer the stream enough to use it for food grade packaging. There are some sort of areas that still sort of can improve, needs much improvement. Things like high volume bulk resource streams, example, construction and demolition waste. There are a lot of opportunity for Sri Lanka to explore solutions. So this is kind of a quick snapshot, and I would like to thank InSeco Cycle, who participated in the study and gave really good inputs. Directorate of the Export Processing Zones of the Board of Investment of Sri Lanka, and the Ministry of Environment, who spoke quite a few things about the producer responsibility, or rather product stewardship schemes that are currently being established and helping us map the future way forward. And I also thank my team in Sri Lanka who helped produce the publication, and thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Mayuri. Such a wonderful case study of Sri Lanka, and it's just interesting kind of that temporal dimension over time of capturing like these circular economy transitions that do happen over a length of time, and all of the kind of actors and the dynamic between, I guess, government policy, and then you've got the market actors on the other end. It's really quite an interesting case study there. So thank you for running us through that. Okay, next up we have Professor Edward Kosior. So Edward is a globally recognised expert in plastics recycling with 49 years experience across both academia and industry. He is the founder of Nextek, a science-based technology consultancy, and has launched a number of successful projects, most recently NEXTLOOPP, which enables food-grade recycling of polypropylene. Edward's mission is to develop and improve on innovative recycling technologies, helping businesses recover materials at higher purity and quality with lower costs through to defining best practices to create a genuine plastic circular economy. Welcome, Edward, and thank you. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Melissa, and I'll just share my screen. That's sharing. So I'll be talking about NEXTLOOPP, which is our initiative to create food-grade recycled PP, and also talk about some of the drivers that took us on this journey. But just to say a little bit about polypropylene, the majority of polypropylene is used in packaging. It's the biggest single application, and in Europe, 44% of PP is used in short-term applications. And if we look at the volumes of this material, polypropylene is actually the world's second most used thermoplastic after PET. This is in rigid packaging. And so in Europe, the tonnage of polypropylene for all applications is 10 million tonnes, and the USA, it's about 8 million tonnes. So, and globally, polypropylene is made in the order of something like 80 million tonnes. So it's a big polymer. And when you think about the volumes being made, it's a very big stream. But typically, it's not turned into bottles. It's pots, tubs, trays, and only some bottles are used. And if I use the figures from United States, only 8% of the 1.25 million tonnes that are generated at households are being recycled. In Europe, it's about 15%. And this project came about because a number of years earlier, in fact, about 10 years prior to the establishment of NEXTLOOPP, we actually developed a technology for recycling polypropylene back to a food-grade material. But we kept on getting requests for application of this technology, and companies wanted to actually put this into the market. So in 2020, amidst, if you like, COVID, we started this project, NEXTLOOPP, and we gathered together a wide range of companies from the whole polypropylene supply chain. I'll show you some of the members in a minute. But the mission was actually to close the loop on packaging. In other words, we wanted to take the packaging that brand owners put on the market, process it, turn it back into food-grade polypropylene resin, and put it back into the product stream once again. And of course, the biggest topic here was it had to be compliant with all the food safety regulations. And it also had to be competitive economically. And we wanted to basically follow the same path that PET had followed. And we do have lots of examples of successful food PET recycling globally. So we know how to actually expand this whole area. We've got a range of companies in our program, something like 50 companies. And you'll see some of the brand owners here, L'Oreal, Braskem, which is a large resin producer, Unilever, global packaging manufacturer and product owner, work in virtually just about every country. And they are part of this group. So in NEXTLOOPP in Europe, we have resin companies. So companies like Ineos, Lyondell-Basell, and two others are resin producers. We've got our brand owners, companies like Danone, Muller, L'Oreal, Saputo, Unilever. And then we have a whole wide range of converters, companies like Sharpak, Geefel Packaging, Silver Plastics, Superfilm. And these people convert packaging for brand owners right now. And then we have technology companies that help develop novel technologies to help the whole process. And I have to say, it's been a fantastic journey because every time we've come across a problem, we've been able to reach into the resources of this very extensive group of companies and put together programs that actually will solve some of the problems that we've previously seen in developing the recycling process, especially in design for recycling. So this program's been running since 2020, and we're just starting NEXTLOOPP Americas. And I have to say, this was before the current administration was elected. So, but it's just getting going as of June. Okay, so just what have we done with the program? We've converted many tons of polypropylene by going and taking the material, taking it through all the steps, creating 7 grades of material suitable for injection molding, extrusion, thermoforming, and film production. And we've conducted a large number of trials to turn the resin into food-grade packaging. And this is, if you like, evidence that we can use the technology to create a true food-grade material. So we don't have to change the resource. It's the lowest carbon footprint, highest resource efficiency process compared to many other processes. And we now have dossiers for food safety under processing in the United Kingdom, in Europe, and United States. And we've also done probably the only unique detailed studies on contamination rates in post-consumer packaging. We also have a grade which is non-food, which is called inert grade polypropylene, which is suitable for cosmetics and automotive applications. And one of the very new applications that we've introduced into our process is the AI sorting of food-grade PP. And this is, if you like, the way in which we operate the program. I won't go through all the steps, but it basically mimics mechanical recycling, and Nextek and NEXTLOOPP do all of the technical work while we have support and participation from all the participants in the program. So it goes through all the necessary stages in this. And so, as I mentioned earlier, this is our target for not just Europe, but also the Americas. So in the stages of recycling, and this is what it looks like when you accumulate polypropylene packaging from the post-consumer stream, we've got a large variety of products, large variety of colors, and these materials need to be separated and sorted. And that's the first step. And we're targeting only food-grade packaging to make food grade, so you can't use non-food packaging. So sorting is a very critical step. And then we carry out all the cleaning steps and decontamination of the material to bring it back to food grade. And that's a very specific process. And the one I'll mention now very briefly is AI sorting. So we've gone through lots of different iterations on how do we sort packaging. We developed fluorescent markers. That was very good, but it required a bit of extra cost. Brand owners are very allergic to extra costs. And so when we started to work on AI with Tomra, we found we had a really interesting and important solution. And this really speeds up the sorting of these materials. I'm just going to show you a quick video. Hopefully this will be only 1 minute. And this video shows how, after training, we can show that we can identify food and non-food and color and if you like, colored and natural materials. And our target was to achieve greater than 95% food content packaging. This process has been running at 5 tons per hour. And what we've done here, we've trained the system what a food package looks like and what a non-food package looks like. And then we let the system do the sorting. We can manipulate the parameters. So in this stream, we're rejecting the non-food. We're also happen to reject the colored packaging as well. So that means we're left over with natural and white packaging. And this is the input to the food grade recycling process. And so with a small amount of mechanical human assistance at the end, we can go to something like very close to 100% food grade materials. So this process is commercial. We're introducing it as a technology to our participant companies. So, and just to say a little bit about the trials, we've conducted lots of trials on high-speed machinery running at full process conditions. And the whole concept is to create a material that is a drop-in replacement. So here we have wide range of materials, and these products are typically created with a target of 30% recycled content. We can go higher, and we discourage brand owners from trying to say we go to 100%. What we want to do is actually introduce the concept and show that food grade recycled PP really works, We want to spread it across the supply chain and also get many companies convinced that they need to take recycled material and that they can do that and do it economically. And yeah, that's the end of my presentation. I know I only had a short time, so happy to open up for questions later on.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Edward. It's really interesting to kind of seeing, being on the cutting edge of that technology, and food grade packaging is really important. So thank you for that. Okay, we'll launch into our Q&A section. So I'm just going to ask a general question just to kick us off to the panelists. I do see that we do have a couple of questions in the Q&A, so we will get to those after. But if anyone does have any questions for the panelists, please continue to pop them into the Q&A comments box. So firstly, I thought it would be interesting, just in terms of a general sense, if there were any lessons, like 1 or 2 key lessons that you had for stakeholders out there, organisations that are also wanting to do similar things and achieve that real multi-stakeholder collaboration that is often quite challenging to do. So I'd be interested from the panel, just if there were any kind of general practical lessons that you've learnt from that process.
I suppose I would think of it maybe not in a lesson, but in a takeaway. And it really struck me when I was looking at Ed's middle slide when he presented all of the brand owners who have got behind this, because I think what that slide demonstrates, and I'd like to quickly share a slide too that demonstrates companies that are behind advanced recycling as well. It's a very similar slide to the one that Ed showed. And I just want you to focus on the right-hand side. And it's really showing that when brand owners and companies and councils, government, when they get together, this is when we start to see these technologies like NEXTLOOPP, like advanced recycling, we start to see them entering as a viable form of recycling. But that support needs to be shown. And so I'd say to brand owners to get on board when there's the opportunity and get behind it. And then we will start to see some of these new technologies. I say that in terms of advanced recycling because it's not really a new one, and it's certainly NEXTLOOPP is a new technology. But that's the only way we're going to see these advance with the support from all of the brand owners and all of those people who are along that chain who use those products and who generate those products. So that's my takeaway from the report.
Absolutely.
For me, I was thinking like the case study I presented, it is a sort of an example of public and private sector engagement towards a common target. So the private sector makes the private operators available for providing solutions, and the public sector basically makes sure that there's an ecosystem set up and the right levers are sort of in place for basically the private sector to sort of do what they do, but at the same time sustain and survive and sort of go on. So if you kind of take a sort of a single problem, there's a public sort of good perspective, and then there's the private interest. Sometimes these two, we generally sort of tend to sometimes be not critical, but look at these with different perspectives. But I feel like to actually have lasting change and at the same time sustaining change, to make sure that there's a complementary role played by everyone, and to have that shared interest and shared agreement on how the risks are being shared. That's quite important. So I think the case study for Sri Lanka is a sort of a fantastic example of how risks are being shared as well. Public authorities can't ban something unless there's a solution or an alternative available, even though that may be the best practice. Or open dumping could not be banned or enforced. But then to make a solution available, there has to be investments brought in, there has to be solutions, tracking of waste streams, labeling, like a lot of other things that needed to be in place. And so the private sector has to actually put in an additional sort of investment into getting that system active, even if they are not having a direct benefit. Like they have a benefit in terms of money coming in, but in terms of ecosystem establishment, they have to put in additional things to get that happening. So it's that shared benefit and risk perspective that you could need to bring to make a change happen. So that's my sort of a comment and input about it.
Yes, so perhaps I might echo Melissa's comments about having the business world engaged. I think it also you have to do two things here. Besides having the industry engaged, they also have to really commit themselves to this area. And I can contrast what happens in Australia with what happens in Europe and what happens in the USA. So in Europe, the companies and the business I've highlighted really want to see this happen. And they're putting up their own money. Nextek coordinate the whole project. We run the whole project with their funds on their behalf. So they're really committed to do this. When we've gone to the United States, the value systems in the United States are quite different. They're not just goals to reach a circular economy, but the goals are there to make a profit. So we're having to have quite a different approach in the US, because while there's general, if you like, what we might call nodding agreement, oh yes, these are important goals, you need companies to invest. They need to put their money on the table. They need to make the commitments to actually make the change. And if I reflect on Australia, where I've lived and worked for many years, Australia is actually behind the US. It's only really in the last 5 years where we've had the government support on industry co-investment in new facilities that has actually lifted the rate of recycling to a level which was really quite low. And of course, we are seeing good progress now, but it needs to continue. And it needs to be matched by, if you like, the passion of the industry players. Government's there, they're giving their support. They've funded many millions of dollars in support for capital works, but you actually need the drive coming from the industry. They need to put their values on the table and pay for them. And I note that in Australia, we've just postponed EPR for another 2 years. It's a pretty dire situation when it comes to real commitment. Something that's meant to happen now has been pushed off. Why? Well, the industry world isn't ready. And we have lots of companies who'd love to support sustainability, but not with real commitment. So that's my takeaway.
So really needing that industry buy-in, so to speak. All right, so we do have some questions from the audience. So the first one is from Natalia, and this question's for Melissa. She's asking, how are factors related to health safety being taken into account on the usage of advanced recycling outcome products? Merging different kinds of plastics can result in non-intention added substances and are harmful for human health. So I'm guessing that there is a limit on what kind of uses they can have. And also that these new technologies should be linked to strong product design regulations. I'm keen to hear your opinion on that.
Yeah, so if I sort of work backwards from the question, I think product design is the key. We should really, and not even product design, even a step before that. First of all, we should be trying to reduce when we can, but of course we can't. We need plastic for, or we would have a problem with keeping food fresh. We obviously need it in the medical areas. So when we get to that point where, okay, plastic is necessary and then we have to deal with it, when it comes to advanced recycling, the difference, and when you talk about sort of combining lots of plastics, in the case of advanced recycling, because those plastics are being taken down to their chemical, like original chemical form, so they're being broken down, like their polymers are big molecules that contain lots of they're big molecules that contain lots of repeating units, and we break those down into smaller units. And because we do that, we can get rid of those impurities because there are further purification processes. So once they're broken down, the products then go through a process where they're converted either to the fuels or they're converted to the monomers. So that really does alleviate some of those issues that we have with contaminants going through. And that's something that you do see with mechanical recycling. The other area of that I'd like to say too is that through some of these pilot studies that are underway, we're making sure that those safety precautions are being met. So the EPA is obviously monitoring it very closely, and we're also making sure that the products that come out of there are being thoroughly tested. So that's possibly one of the reasons why this is taking so long to really, you know, become part of the Australian recycling, you know, kit, is because there is a lot of that work going on just to make sure that it's a robust process.
Perhaps I just add a little bit on mechanical recycling. One of the things that we do in developing a mechanical recycling process for food grade applications is we create a challenge test. We actually deliberately contaminate material with a range of chemical surrogates, which are designed to simulate post-user contamination. And we then subject that material to the whole process. And then we have to then check what this material looks like at the end. And so we do this by chemical analysis. We look for non-intentionally added substances, and we have to come up with, if you like, specific migration modeling showing what would then eventually migrate into food. So it's a very rigorous process. In Europe, the process probably takes about 2 years of data collection. In the US, it's a little bit quicker and simpler. Probably takes something like 6 months to prepare a proposal, and probably another 6 months to get it cleared. So the challenge test is, if you like, the way of validating that. But with mechanical recycling, what we do at the very beginning, we purify the material successively by separation and sorting, then by washing, and then by thermal decontamination in the latter steps of the process. So it's a very rigorous process, and we've got 2 technologies that are hard at work right now. So in Australia, we have food grade recycled PET and food grade recycled HDPE milk bottles. And they've been running successfully since at least 2012. And that was coming out of the Wetherill Park plant at Visy, which we designed. So still all going. Lots of people using these materials and probably not even conscious that they contain recycled content.
Thanks, Edward and Melissa. Yeah, that safety piece is really important as well, of course. So that's very interesting. Thank you for the question, Natalia. So we've got a question from Roloff, and this is directed for Mayuri. Have there been any issues raised in Sri Lanka regarding toxic emissions from the plastics incineration in the cement kilns?
Yeah, the cement kiln is sort of a cement kiln co-processing. One reason why it is identified as a sort of a an acceptable or a sort of a I would say safe solution for a range of waste types is that the temperature at which the some of the nasty types of waste, like I think I told you, tank bottoms, sludges, and paint waste. There's a red list. There's a negative list for cement kiln co-processing, and then there's things like radioactive waste cannot be taken in, and there has to be a sort of a really sound and rigorous filtering procedure, pre-qualification basically. And but the range of types of waste that is accepted, there's the temperature at which it's being processed and the residence time at that temperature. So I think 1,800 to 2,000 degrees Celsius, and there's 2 to 3 seconds at the temperature. It kind of breaks it into CO2, NO2, like some of the elementary gases. And cement kilns usually have a continuous emissions monitoring of established for emissions out of the stack. And the particular company that I'm talking about had 8 sort of components measured. And they around the world, they usually establish the thermal destruction ability of cement kilns by conducting regular sort of tests. So it's 99.69 plus, like, you know, it's a kind of there's a thermal destruction ability monitoring that it's a certified kiln for thermally destructing some of the waste types, especially things like PCBs or some sort of very sensitive types of waste. So yes, it's being continuously monitored and assured that when there's something going through the cement kilns, and it's further verified and validated by monitoring emissions. So that's why it's generally considered a safe solution. Now, whether it's a solution aligned with principles of circular economy, as I said, it's a base solution, which is a bit better than incineration and landfilling. I mean, better than incineration because raw material value of the waste going inside, waste is basically recognized. But on the other hand, you take, if it is not going to the cement kilns, it has to be further incinerated for waste types like sludges. So what happens is that instead of burning coal, you take that emissions into the cement making process. That's why it's considered as sort of a more upgraded solution than incineration. But of course, things like plastic waste, if it can be recycled, if it can be better designed for dismantling and cleaning or servicing, there are much better solutions aligned with principles of circular economy. So that's why I think some of the base solutions have to emerge, but also an industry has to have integrated other solutions, which are higher order pathways towards a circular economy, which has to emerge in the presence of a base solution. Otherwise, you would be actually doing thermal destruction, but nothing else. So in the case of Sri Lanka, I think the emergence of the other solutions, that was the interesting part, because there's a market being made, there's regulatory enforcement being made, etc.
Thanks, Mayuri. Yeah, that's a really, really interesting answer to that one. And thanks, Rolla, for the question. Now, I think we'll have one more question to the panel, and then we'll wrap up. So this one is from Ben Kantash, and this is for Edward. What are the technical complications of approving recycled PP, recycled HDPE compared to recycled PET? How many years do we see this happening at scale?
Well, the challenges, the challenges are basically the same. So it takes approximately, let's say, US FDA, a year to prepare the proposal and get it submitted to US FDA and then get it approved. With Europe, we've now got a new regulation, 1616/2022. It's a regulation for recycled plastics and direct food contact. They've specified 2 years of data gathering, and then the European Food Safety Authority can have up to 2 years of consideration or thinking about it, and then they can issue what might call a letter of non-objection. So it's a really interesting sort of process. But in the meantime, you can actually put the material on the market, provided you make a declaration of compliance to the regulations. So this is indeed what's happening in Europe. So in the UK, we're about to start production of food-grade PP, and our participants will be able to put it onto the market. So very interesting new approach. So it can happen fairly quickly, but it is a complex area because, how many companies will invest in a recycling technology when they haven't had, if you like, the Food Safety Authority of that country doing the evaluation? And the answer is, they're very hesitant. And so they really want third-party accreditation by a high order body like a Food Safety Authority. So companies tend to wait for that to happen first, and then they go on. In the US, you have to be very careful reading the letters of non-objection, because you can get letters of non-objection for plastics for dry food contact. So, for example, for eggs or fruit and so on, when they're handled in a crate, but they're not necessarily for direct food contact for applications above room temperature, nor for example, in contact with oil or butter and so on. So you do have to read these things very carefully. But it'll be interesting to note that there is nothing stopping anybody from putting food grade recycled PP onto the market in Australia right now. There's no law stopping you. You just simply have to put it on the market. There is no law. All you have to do is comply with the food grade regulations for plastics, and there's an Australian standard for that. And I'll just remind everyone that the Australian standard is not a legal constraint. You don't have to comply with the Australian standard. It's not a law. It's not a regulation. It's a standard, but it's not a law. So there is a interesting and complex scenario if you want to put materials on the market, and it's all to do with risk. And every recycler who puts food grade PET or HDPE is responsible for every kilo that they make and put on the market. So that's why they want to be completely sure that they can comply. We spend a lot of time on analysing regulations, what they say, making sure everyone's happy with the regulatory side of things. But in Australia, we can use either FDA or EFSA for compliance. So we have that lucky situation. We can go for either stream. But most companies want to see EFSA because they are, if you like, far more stringent than FDA.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Edward. Yeah, look, we're about to wrap up. So there's a couple more questions in there. I'm so sorry we didn't get to that section. So I would like to a big thank you to our speakers today. Really appreciate your time. I think this has been an interesting discussion. It's been wonderful hearing the case studies that you spoke about. I also wanted to thank everyone that contributed to this report. So if you are interested in reading the report, you can scan the QR code on the screen and it will take you to a full version of the report that's been published just today. So if you are interested, I recommend checking it out. So thank you to the co-authors that contributed to the report. Thank you to the anonymous reviewers as well that we had that really helped to elevate the standard there. Also, a thank you to Alston from CERN APAC for promoting this event quite widely. We really appreciate your assistance there. And of course, thanks to the audience for those that asked questions. I think this has been a really interesting session. So thanks, everyone. All right, bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.